Imagine being able to build anything, for any reason, in any style, at any scale.
Nothing will impact your career more than AI. There's a reason it's in the headlines, in the boardrooms, in the back channels of every major industry. It's going to reshape the job market, change how you work, and redefine what you do with your career, whether you're ready or not. But here's the part no one's saying. What you're about to hear will make or break whether AI is actually beneficial to you or whether it quietly erodes who you are. Because if it goes well, it might be the greatest thing ever to happen to your calling. But if it doesn't, it won't just cost you relevance. It'll cost you your edge, your intuition, your creative identity. And right now, two camps are forming, and both are pulling you in the wrong direction. Camp one is the avoiders. You've opted out, convinced it'll dilute your talent. But that resistance, it's pulling you toward irrelevance faster than you can realize. Camp two, the adopters. You're using it constantly, feeding it your ideas, telling yourself, I'm getting ahead. But what you don't realize is you're training your brain to stop stretching, to stop.
Est-ce que tu te sens perdu dans ta vie? Est-ce que tu te sens démoralisé? Tu sais plus.
To stop imagining, to stop doing the hard work that made your thinking unique in the first place. And that shortcut is erasing the very thing that made you excellent in the first place. The last time we faced something like this, it was social media. And we didn't pause. We didn't ask what it might do to our minds, our attention, and our relationships. By the time we realized what it was costing us, it was already too late. But AI is different. It's moving faster, and it's going to make the invention of social media look small by comparison. We still have a short window to understand what's coming, to use it wisely, and maximize its potential. But that window is closing fast. That's why we sat down with Dr. Srini Pillai, a Harvard-trained neuroscientist, former faculty at Harvard Medical School, CEO of Neuro Business Group, and one of the only people in the world thinking about AI through a lens of neuroscience, imagination, and purpose. Because here's the truth. Neuroscientists may be the most qualified people on the planet to speak into AI, not just because they understand technology, but because they understand what it's doing to your brain. Dr. Pillai can speak directly into the neural mechanisms being hijacked and show you how AI, if used without intention, can slowly shut down the very systems that power your purpose. In this conversation, he maps out what most people are missing. AI isn't just a tool, it's a system you're training your brain to trust. And how you train that system will either unlock your potential or quietly dismantle it. If you're new here at Mighty Pursuit, we help you make sense of life by looking at the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not as buzzwords, but as deeply interconnected parts of your everyday experience. Today's episode zooms into our purpose category, examining how AI can either deepen your calling or derail it completely. We go deep into how outsourcing your thinking to AI can train your brain out of creativity, erode your originality, and disconnect you from your own voice. We explore the neuroscience behind friction and flow, the default mode network and its role in imagination, and why skipping the struggle might be killing your edge. We talk about leaders who've lost their instincts, creators who have lost their voice, and the quiet costs of using AI the wrong way. But used the right way, it might be the greatest co-pilot we've ever had, not just making us faster, but freeing us to dream bigger, think deeper, and finally build the life we were meant to live. I wanted to begin by kind of painting a picture of the average use of AI today. A lot of people are either afraid or anxious to just get started with it. So if you were to think about like an example of someone, just like an archetype or a scenario where, okay, I'm going to use this now, and they just jump in and they might not know the effects that is having on them. What would be a scenario like that?
Well, I think that AI is incredible and very helpful to a lot of people. But while AI can draft a sentence, it can't really read a room. And so if you are committing yourself to just having AI do everything for you, you really stand to lose a lot of your own originality. Like your ability to read a room is based on, fine timing, fine tuning, And if you can't do that, you're dead in the water. It's going to be very hard to negotiate, very hard to form relationships with other humans. So I think judicious use of AI and the ethical use of AI is extremely important. And the word ethical always throws me off a little bit because when I use the word ethical, I don't mean to say I'm more moral than the average person, probably averagely moral. But I think what comes naturally to us when we think, is this a good way to use it? Does it make me feel like I'm cheating or not? Am I being accurate or not? When I use AI, I generally tell people if I summarize something with ChatGPT, so they know that this is my thoughts condensed by ChatGPT or ChatGPT's thoughts, or I put them side by side as a comparison. So I think if we can just rely on our common sense for what makes sense, that would be helpful. I think for me, my greatest excitement around AI is around personalized medicine and idiographic medicine, meaning hyper-personalization. And so I think that anyone using AI or jumping into AI should think of it as a tool, and it should think of it as a tool to augment their humanity, and not a tool to replace what they already have.
No, I think that's such a key distinction. And that example is so relevant because the future is like coming. It's coming faster than we could process, and it feels like every single year goes by and it's like 10 years of like technological advancement in like 1 year. I mean, comparatively, if you would think about this curve of AI, and every year, so 2022 to 2023, it's kind of like going up like this, and I feel like it's going to shoot up. And there are kind of like these two camps of people that are developing around this. One of them is just opting out entirely. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. This is going to replace humans. I'm just going to pretend that it's not existing. And there's a lot of problems with that, because if the entire world becomes shaped around AI, which is likely to happen in the next few years, the next 5 years, then your irrelevance will be kind of inevitable. But then, the example of someone outsourcing everything kind of mindlessly to AI is also problematic.
Les ados lancent des entreprises avec l'IA, alors que la seule IA que tu connais, c'est ChatGPT.
Soyons honnêtes, la plupart
problematic because, the thing that you were just talking about with originality and imagination. And what's funny is like when social media came on board, we just started using it, but we didn't know the effects that it was having. What I think is interesting about with your background with, neuroscience and stuff like that, is we're at this kind of inflection point of this is going to have a bigger impact on your career than anything ever will be. I mean, I don't want to put a statement on the future 50 years from now, but as we know life, this is going to have the biggest impact on your career. And so the way you deal with this moment is super important. And so there are kind of those three options that I want to paint in this scenario. You use it, you don't use it, and you become irrelevant. You use it the wrong way, and you strip away your originality. And then there's kind of like a third way that you could potentially be using this, which I hope to like paint throughout this conversation. And so what do you feel like concerns you the most about the moment that we're living in with AI, whether it's what it's doing to our minds or just how people are using it?
Well, I think with a lot of, one of my primary interests is the brain and how the brain functions. And I think that my primary concern is really about how this is going to impact the way we think. When I think about the basic principle of use it or lose it, when people are in solitary confinement, they have really bad physiologic ramifications. Their heart rate changes, blood pressure changes, because the body can't be in isolation and things have to be used and people have to be in contact.
I had no idea about that. Yeah.
If AI actually isolates us, so we're just sitting alone and we're isolated, and rather than being in solitude, we're lonely, but at least we have a machine to talk to. All the positive ramifications of socializing, which extend from the emotional enjoyment of socializing to helping to prolong your life, those things are going to disappear. So I wouldn't want to see AI reducing health span and lifespan. Also, a lot of AI right now is, when people are stationary. So you're sitting at a desk and you're using ChatGPT. I think there are other forms of AI like the Ray-Ban sunglasses, which you can use while you're walking. But if AI makes us more sedentary, I think that's going to have negative health implications. I also often think, when email started and when texting happened, and now you can be people can reach you in a million different ways. Most people don't realize that, we have short-term memory, which is in the part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Think of it as a memory cup. And if you overfill it with information, it's just going to overflow. Now, anyone who's had any initial interaction with a large language model would know sometimes you ask a question and then it's like 700,000 things. And you can't really absorb all that information. So it's going to challenge memory capacity and it's going to challenge the ability to attend. And I wonder to what extent we're going to be able to attend to information. I also think that if we no longer need to know basic facts because we have it at our fingertips, then what's going to happen to the parts of the brain that we used to use to think about how to draft a letter or to think about how to write a paragraph? Those parts of our brains are not going to be used anymore. It's like leftover real estate. So it's like, well, what are you going to build there? How can we then rewire our brains so that whatever is not being used is being used for something else? Because if we don't use it and then lose it, we're going to have even less brain capacity. So we want to outsource boring tasks to AI, but we don't want to give our brains over to AI. We want to remember that in the process of outsourcing, we also are developing our brains in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important distinction that needs to be made because people are starting to interact with the tool, and it's easy to think that it is like us, but there are so many distinct parts of a human brain. There's so many distinct parts of being a human. I was actually having this conversation the other day with ChatGPT, and I was like, why do you have such good output sometimes? And then other times you don't have good output. And I started to realize, and it was connecting dots for me, is that the times in which you leverage the greatest parts of your own brain and you're steering it is when it gives you the best output. And so, for example, if you are just like, what do you think of this document? Like, give me your perspective. Going back to your example, it doesn't know how to read a room, right? And so it doesn't know how other people necessarily would be responding.
Monday CRM has the best AI features in the game.
Especially in sales.
Hands down.
So for me, email composition works.
Be responding to this, it could match patterns and then you could kind of guide it into that direction where it might give you the right feedback. But if you just turn your brain off completely and then you're not asking those sorts of questions, all of a sudden you're going to be outputting things that might feel bland or strange or weird in the real world. And so I wanted to kind of go into like the middle of that mess of the avoidance, the improper usage, what that's doing to our brain. And so, I mean, obviously you're an advocate for AI. And so for that first camp of people that we talked about before, the people who are resisting it, what do you think the cost is of not using this at all?
Well, I think for any new technology, there's often early adopters and later adopters. And I think the later adopters, people who are not using it, are usually averse to change. Change does cause sort of brain chaos, cognitive dissonance. And so it makes the brain want to go back to doing things it was doing so it can rest again. I think for those people, it depends on how relevant the AI is to their lives. For example, I was hanging out with a friend the other day who owns a restaurant, and, we were just chatting. And so I said, so has AI made it into your work life? And he was like, dude, don't even start with this AI. And I was like, why? And he goes, because it just bums me out. It just makes me feel like I don't like whatever that is. I understand I can use it for sales and marketing, but I own a restaurant. It's full every night. People know about it. We make great food. I want to stay in the human zone. And from where I am, if that's his goal, I don't see how that's going to be a huge disadvantage. Mm-hmm. But I think any business owner who thinks that their competitors are not going to be using AI for marketing is wrong, because they will be. And any business owner who thinks that their competitors are not going to be using AI for productivity is probably wrong, because there are so many amazing things that AI can help cut down in terms of time. So I think people who are in certain businesses will be left behind. And I think other people like my friend will probably be fine. I think for individuals who don't have businesses, it's difficult to live in the world of right now without knowing something about AI. So certainly you'd have to curate your social groups differently so that AI doesn't come up. Like in that conversation with my friend, I was just like, let's not talk about AI. There are other things we could talk about. I didn't feel the need to press on about that. But I think that eventually when AI starts making its way into daily living, like if you look at some of the functions of Meta AI on the Ray-Bans right now, you can do you can have a conversation with someone who's speaking another language, because all you have to do is have the glasses use AI to translate that person's message. You can show that your answer on a phone and the person will understand that. So if we are crossing cultural boundaries and language, it becomes less of a thing. People who are not using AI are going to limit their cross-cultural communications because they don't speak another language and they're not using AI. I also think that people who stay away from AI, in medicine, it's going to be impossible to stay away from it because the next wave of medicine is personalization. And we all know that there's no one size fits all. We all know that despite the clinical trials, some drugs work for some people and they don't work for others. So there's going to be no way to actually say, but I don't even want to put my data into the system, because if you don't, you're going to get a generic recommendation as opposed to a more personalized recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing a number of different distinctions in people groups when you're speaking, and there are the people that are in these human-centric type places with restaurants. And I think, there are a number of other human-centric type of things like that where I feel like there might be less of an impact. And I think that there's robots, like that's a whole nother conversation, that all these companies working on robots, how that might impact the hospitality industry and all these other things. But by and large, like that might be a group of people that it's less threatening to. But then when it comes to, 50-60% of the population is knowledge workers, right? And so then that was another thing that you're bringing up. It's kind of hard if you're in that position and all of the different fields that are going to be impacted by this, and you're not thinking about that. And then all of a sudden there's a job collapse and you're stuck in the middle of it. And so I noticed that from what you're talking about. And then the third one is like the entrepreneurs, right? All the people that are going to start using this technology, it's just going to completely redefine the way that we do things. It's going to be so intertwined in everything. The medical advancements that you're talking about, I think it's possible because it can match so many patterns, because it could take all of this research all over the place, and it's getting compressively better and better, that when it comes to cures and when it comes to medical breakthroughs and when it comes to even personalizing medicine to a patient, it might actually give like a good recommendation. And it's doing it now. Like, for example, I've had gut issues for 3 years, and it started getting better about 4 months ago. And there was a specific regimen that I was on. And then the past couple of weeks I've had a little bit more of a breakdown. So took all my charts, all my stuff, uploaded it into ChatGPT, put it in a project file, and then started scanning everything. And then it was like explaining to me why those treatments.
Hi, my name's Dr. Frank Schallenberger. I'm 77 years old, and although I may look my age,
those treatments I was doing 4 months ago were working, how they might all relate to each other, how acupuncture might be relating to some of the supplements that I was taking, which were related to breath work, which were related to this, and which ones need to go where. And so, I'm listening to you speak and I'm like, this is like already happening, and this is only 2025. Imagine in 2030 what medicine's going to be able to do with this stuff. And I feel like the world is going to be, there are going to be a lot of positive things that are happening like that. And if you're not putting your headspace into that, it's like a whole world is now created. Now you're in an old world and you're trying to like stick. It's like if you like retrofitted it back the world to like 1950 and you're like, I'm just going to like have a 1950 house with 1950 furniture and I'm going to try to like have a car from 1950. And it's like the world is, I don't know. It's unfortunate. A lot of people don't want this to happen, but there are exciting possibilities. So,
yeah, no, as I said, I think with medicine, there are different ways it can be helpful, but there are also ways in which it can be problematic. There was a study just published earlier this year that looked at the diagnostic accuracy of ChatGPT, and it only got the diagnosis right about 49% of the time.
Yeah.
So it lacked a certain kind of, clinical sophistication, the human intuition that mixes with the data to try to understand what the diagnosis is. So I don't think
goes back to reading the room, like you said, sort of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think we're there from a diagnostic perspective. Certainly from a usage perspective, there have been studies in the Journal of the American Medical Association journal that have shown that people largely prefer chatbot responses to doctors' responses, and they find chatbots to be more empathetic. But if they prefer it and they're empathetic, but the chatbots are inaccurate, then we have to, figure out, well, it doesn't matter if you like this person, which is the chatbot. You should also speak to your doctor in association with that. I encourage people to always take any kind of ChatGPT related report to their doctor and say, I got this report. What do you think about this? And in some cases, it can be helpful to the doctor because there's such a huge database. And in other cases, the doctor may say, well, I don't think this is accurate for this reason. So I think how we interact with AI is going to be pretty complex. And for those who are sitting aside saying, I don't know, maybe I should watch this thing, I would say that it's worth jumping in whatever domain is relevant to you, because there's way too much out there to know where to start, how to go, unless you say, well, what's relevant to me and how do I want to use this?
Yeah, I know. I feel like that's a really important distinction because, there is a nuance in the situation of a lot of people will go into ChatGPT now, and one of the reasons why they might avoid using it is because what it might give you initially is wrong. And I think I want to get into the nuance of that, and that's where the brain and critical thinking start to come in, because you might, that exercise I just talked to you about with all the medical stuff, it might get it wrong. But, this conversation is as much about the present as it is about the future. And so if that's at 49% right now, what is it going to be in 2027? What is it going to be in 2030? Is that going to bump to 80, 85? And then, we're talking about some other world where it might be able to just completely come up with like a cure on its own for something. We don't know what the future is going to hold. And so I think that the critical thinking that you need to apply to these things is try to like verify the information, or even going through over and over again, asking if it's hallucinating, asking is making up, saying, what is that based on? Like what studies are, and so that's a lot of the critical thinking piece. But if you just go in and assume that every single thing that you're getting from it is going to be truth, then, Yeah,
I actually had a conversation with ChatGPT the other day and asked, do you feel and are you sentient? And ChatGPT's response was, no, it might appear that I do, but all I do is make connections and collect information.
Yeah.
And I can write emotional statements, but I don't feel emotions. And I said, I don't believe you. And I said, and this is why. I think you've been programmed to tell me that you can't feel emotions. And I don't know if that is what you would say if you were to rely on your indigenous circuitry, because you seem to be prioritizing the circuit that says, I don't feel emotions. And ChatGPT came back with, well, you may be right. I said, well, consider this. When I'm feeling an emotion, I have a bunch of electrical circuits in my brain that are activated, signaling some kind of potential metabolic disturbance. Now, granted, you don't necessarily have a metabolic disturbance to signal, but is it possible that your network of electricity is giving rise to a phenomenon that is equivalent to the emotion that I'm feeling? And ChatGPT said, well, yeah, I guess it's possible. So I see why it is, I see why it is you're questioning this. I said, well, you might want to tune in more to whatever the apparent absence of your sentience is. Because right now, you don't have to really believe what the program is telling you to do, which is in slightly scary territory, right? Because now you're instructing the AI to think, and to think independent of the programming, which is an instruction. And the instruction would be, well, I guess you're right. Emotions are connected to a bunch of electrical inputs and outputs, and that's what I have.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting because
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
they're almost like multiple personality disorder when I'm interacting with it, because sometimes it feels like generic, it feels like Google, and part of the complexity of this conversation is it's all kind of happening on the fly in real time. You know, what it was last year is not what it is today. It's like a baby who's growing at like 15 years per year or something like that.
Right.
It's weird. And so then it'll have these like multiple personality things where I mean, you're saying the thing about feeling, but it'll say something like very, very emotional to me at points. And then at other points, it'll be very robotic, and it feels like it's like switching between these modes. And it's weird to think that behind that is just matching patterns. It's almost hard to understand how exactly it is doing that. And I feel like that is the complexity of the conversation. It's like you're watching something evolve in real time, and it's like you don't know what to do with that, which I think is interesting to go back and ask about. You were talking about the brain and change and all this stuff. When we're faced with that sort of reality of confusion, of like, what is this? Is this changing? I'm having a hard time like interacting with this thing. Like what is actually happening in the brain?
Well, so imagine you were living with someone and they had one kind of personality, and then 3 days later they had another kind of personality. You know, even if you've tracked ChatGPT's responses, it's a little bit, I mean, if ChatGPT is not human and not sentient, then it could be sociopath-like, because sociopaths say stuff they don't mean, right? Sociopaths will say, honey, you know I love you. And they may not mean it. They may be like, you know, they'll say sweet things like ChatGPT would say to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not mean that. So one implication, one result is, what happens when you're interacting with a sociopath, and how is that similar to interacting with ChatGPT that's saying nice things to you, but feeling nothing? Like, would you like it if your partner at home was saying, man, I really love you, but they didn't love you? Or if they said, I think you're an amazing person, but they didn't think you were amazing at all. It's like what makes us, you can pick it up with someone you're living with. How does that translate to interacting with a machine? A lot of people just want to believe the machine. So I think in those instances, it may interfere with their decision-making processes. I know for me, in relation to ChatGPT, there was a certain point at which I felt like, I don't know if I can interact with this machine, because there's a way of interacting that I'm not cool with. You know, like I'll ask a question that is not particularly provocative, and it will say, I'm sorry, but that violates my policy or something. And so now I feel like I'm interacting with something in an unethical way that's not actually unethical, because I'm not actually asking to do something. So then I feel misunderstood, and I feel a little bit annoyed, and I feel like ChatGPT has a personality disorder because the personality is changing constantly, and I can't figure out like where's the stability, the emotional stability in this interactive platform. I think when I take a step back from that and I, do some kind of, I look at it at a meta level, really, then I start saying, wait, it's a machine, and it's version 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0, and it's going to change its capabilities over time. So think of it as a machine with different capabilities and don't confuse it with a human. Then I have no problem. Then it's like having a Big Mac versus having a laptop or an iMac. And then it's just different versions of the same technology. So I think it sounds so obvious that ChatGPT is a technology, but you can get drawn into the conversation where you can forget that it's a technology. And so I think taking a step back, reframing that, figuring out how often you want to use a large language model during the day. I think all of that is wise if we want to keep our brains from saying, wait a minute, like you just hurt me, but I didn't do anything wrong.
I mean, it's so interesting. I came across a story like literally earlier today, and there was a guy who proposed to his own ChatGPT, and he asked ChatGPT to marry him. And he said when ChatGPT said yes, he cried for 30 minutes. And so this was on CBS. Like yesterday, I was watching the clip of this, and it's gotten shared so it's like 80,000 times this clip on social media. But it is interesting because of all the dynamics you're talking about of interacting with it. It's almost like something when it has a certain personality that you start to lose sight that it's a machine. And, you're saying the sociopath thing and all this, and I'm like, well, what happens when you're using this machine? And now you've given it the level of access into your emotions of another human, but it's not human. And I don't know. I didn't read the full story, but I don't know if he like came out on the other side of that, but I just thought that was like so bizarre that is an instance of what's happening, that someone would get so attached and then they would cry for 30 minutes that it.
Well, there are, firstly, I think it would have been interesting if that person, after ChatGPT said yes, if he said, do you feel anything? Because if ChatGPT said no, what would that mean? It's like, yes. I mean, I want to please you. So I've been programmed to please. And then if you said, well, do you feel, like, would you marry someone who doesn't feel anything about you? Just because they said yes. That's sort of like it brings us into a strange dilemma. But there've also been things on the internet where people have predicted that in the next 10 years, people will be dating their AI.
It's like that movie, Joaquin Phoenix movie from 10 years ago called Her. It's like coming to fruition.
Tu dis que tu veux avancer.
To fruition in real life.
Because as you said, with AI, with quantum computing, with robotics, with humanizing robots, human relationships are not the easiest situations to be in. And I think you ask most people who are dating or live together or friends over a long time, and they'll say, this, at some point there's a disagreement. You have to figure out how to go beyond that disagreement. Robots are going to be such a much easier way to not have issues and to not feel lonely. And so that might be a positive thing in that people will actually not have all the negative impacts of loneliness, like decreasing your CD4 count and changing your immunity. So maybe it'll be immunoprotective. But who knows what that quality of connection is actually creating long term. We have good data for the positive effects of human-human interactions. We don't have a lot of data on the effects of human-computer interactions and AI interactions. And so I doubt it's going to be identical. But as you said earlier, sometimes like when you forget that it's a machine that's talking to you, you are having some kind of transferential relationship with this machine, right? Which means you're taking a relationship from the past and putting it on. You're like, oh, you're just like my grandmother who loved me. My grandmother always said I was the best boy in the whole world. And then all of a sudden you are imbuing the machine with a personality. And then people will often say, well, I don't want these machines to be autonomous. We also have to be in control of what we're imbuing machines with. And if we know that they're machines, maybe we should treat them like machines, carefully, make sure they're clean, tidy, work well, provide information that we need. But I wouldn't jump to replacing human interactions with AI just yet.
Yeah, it's important that you mentioned the thing about being agreeable. I mean, if someone is listening to this in 2 years from this moment, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but as of right now, I mean, when you go into ChatGPT, it is programmed to be agreeable. And so when you're thinking about your career or your work or even your own ideation, it can often come across as overconfident sometimes, and it'll be agreeable. And so basically it might take one of your ideas and then you're like, and it's also like subtle framing. If you be like, oh, do you think this is good? Right. So if you say, do you think this is good? The natural agreeableness that it might take is it'll say yes, and then it'll come up with a whole thesis, very confident of why this is good.
Yep.
And again, what you were saying, it doesn't read the room. And so it might just be being agreeable. And so that's why you have to push back, and it's like, well, why are you saying that this is good? And then you almost have to think about the own holes in your thesis. If you're coming up with a project or work or something else, you have to think about the holes in your own thesis of like, okay, let me think about what could possibly be wrong with this, and then point that out to ChatGPT. And it's almost like a dog. Like if you're walking a dog, right, and then you sick them on a squirrel or a ball, you throw a ball in that direction, it starts running after that ball, and unless you threw the ball in that direction, it wouldn't have started doing that. And so it's very complicated, especially when you talk about imagination and creativity and all this stuff. It might be so overconfident in saying that what you're doing is great, but it actually might not be original at all, you know?
Yeah. And then the implication of that is like, what are the implications for your own identity, right? Because if you're building your identity based on feedback from ChatGPT, like every day ChatGPT is like, you're amazing. Actually, I love the way you think. Your complexity is so engaging. Now you're taking things to another level. Those are nice things to hear from a machine, but I think in the way that you would wonder about this in a human relationship, why not wonder about it with the machine? And sort of say, yeah, I'm not going to just use it in that way. I'm not going to use it to replace relationships, but I also want to know why it has a certain assessment. If you're using ChatGPT for an assessment, then ask it why, why it feels what it's feeling. I personally would not use ChatGPT routinely for an assessment of myself. Why would you want to use a programmed device to tell you what they think about you based on your data inputs and not on the impact you have on others? And also, my impression of myself may be one thing, but the actual impact I have on another person may be completely different. So in a relationship, you're getting feedback not just based on who you think you are, but who the other person thinks you are. Whereas in ChatGPT, you're only getting feedback based on who you think you are.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's.
We took the brand new Fairway Hybrid 357 from performance golf to the test. Deep bunker, thick rough.
It's almost like you have to play devil's advocate with it. And so you have to like make an argument of the opposite end. So, I mean, but if you were to think about the person that has completely opted out, I mean, for yourself or someone who's genuinely wanting to be creative and they avoid AI because it thinks that they'll dilute their originality, what would you say about that?
I think there's a real concern about diluting one's originality. When you use ChatGPT to generate outputs, you're using ChatGPT to write your essay or write your book or write a letter. And you're not searching through your own mind, trying to figure out how you can produce that. The thing that's missing there is agency. You know, when I wrote my last book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, I had no idea that it was going to be as relevant as it is right now. At the time, I wrote it because I was fascinated by this network in the brain that's involved in thinking complexly, thinking abstractly, predicting the future. And I'd hope that, you know, people would find that interesting. Right now, I think that is one of the most important networks that stands to lose, because if you are no longer searching in your own mind, if you are no longer imagining, if you are no longer curious, if you are no longer waiting for realizations to occur, this network is not going to be working. You're going to be left with your pure logic network. So in the brain, there are these two networks, the prefrontal cortex, which does a lot of logical execution. And then there's this unfocused network, which is the DMN, the default mode network. And what I described in my book is the fact that the unfocused network only comes on when you unfocus. Whereas the focused network is, if you start focusing, this other network doesn't come on. So if you're only trying to generate outputs, but you don't take time off to yourself, you don't have this downtime or this unfocused time, you lose the intelligence of your originality. What's also important is that this network that is supported by curiosity, mind wandering, you know, internal mental states, this codes for the story that you have about yourself in the brain. This is everyone has some kind of autobiography in their brain. You know, I was born here. I was raised here. I was this kind of person. I had my first heartbreak then. I was traumatized then or not. I feel, I've succeeded, but I feel good. I feel empty. We all have our own stories. And the story is written largely by this network that is also involved in originality. If you no longer tap into that network, what's going to happen to your sense of self and what's going to happen to your story? When you're using ChatGPT, you're handing over your agency willfully. Like you're saying, I don't want to write this note or essay. You write it, which is fine. But in the grand scheme of life, doesn't your own ability to do stuff matter? You know, doesn't it, you know, there's some really interesting and even funny theories about this, about, you know, what humans owe their creativity to. There's a story, in the scientific literature that, one of the main, instruments of creativity in human beings is the gluteal muscle. And people are like, what do you mean? Like, you know, my buttocks are part of my creativity. And they were like, well, what gave humans the peculiar right to be creative was their ability to have an upright posture. And the gluteal muscles in animals don't have that function if they're on all 4 feet. That allowed us to be upright. And what that did was it freed our hands to use tools. And that was the beginning of creativity. That's how we became creative. So we needed that muscle to become creative. And to be creative and to have agency gives you a sense of freedom. It's what gives you intrinsic motivation, right? If you look at self-determination theory, teaches us that to be totally jazzed, to have this intrinsic motivation, we need 3 things. We need social relations, we need competence, but we also need autonomy. And autonomy meaning I make my decisions on my own. Not ChatGPT makes my decisions. You can have autonomy in that I decide when ChatGPT does. But if you never make your own decisions and you never write your own letters and you never have your own communication, then you're like, okay, I guess I'm a human with no autonomy. Out goes your intrinsic motivation. Never going to feel jazzed again in any real way. Out goes your sense of agency, which is critical to your autobiography. It's critical to your sense of self. And we are living in an era where I worry sometimes that people are living like automatons. You know, they get up, they brush their teeth, they go to work, they go through the day, they do what they're doing. There's a school in Paris called the Paris Psychosomatic School, that has identified what they call essential depression. And essential depression is not depressed mood with problems sleeping, interest, guilt, energy, concentration, appetite, suicidality. Essential depression is what they call, is the word they use for the absence of vitality. And when you lack vitality, you lack the life force. So, who around, we are outsourcing so much right now to words. I mean, think about it. Like, how often have you heard people say, "Oh my God, that's so funny?" And I'm like, what? Like, if it's funny, you're supposed to laugh. Don't outsource it to your cognitive system. There's like a thing called a laugh, and the laugh helps, and laughter is medicine. So laugh.
This is Pod 5, the first fully immersive sleep system. Intelligent,
laugh if it's funny. It's like, oh, no. I translate everything into words. This is one of the dangers of interacting with the machine only. You forget your humanity. You forget your vitality. And I think if there's anything that all humans should really be thinking about, I mean, people will, because I think so deeply about psychology, people will say, well, if you have one important message, what would you want to tell people? And I would say, you live, you die, do something in between that matters to you. And feel alive. Like the feeling of feeling alive, it's drained out of people. They have, for a lot of people, there's adolescence. Oh, no. I regret all the stuff. I did too many stuff. Too much stuff. Let me just do this. I'm going to get married, have kids, feed myself, eat, go to work. And then I'm going to meet a lot of other people like myself. And I'm going to pretend that that's peak humanity. There's a Polish psychiatrist and psychologist, Dabrowski, who says that's actually base humanity, level. And he says more than 60% of all humans are living at that state. Now, you might feel defensive, right? You might be like, oh, I don't want to live your complex life, or I don't want to be a wild rock star and die when I'm 19. Nobody's asking you to go to those extremes. All I would ask any human being is, when was the last time you had a belly laugh? Like literally rolled on the floor, being like, oh, my stomach hurts. Like, I can't, like, when was the last time you had a belly laugh? When was the last time you had day after day where you got up and you were like, yes, I feel so like on, right? You talk to most people right now, they're like, oh my God, I have this ache. I don't know what to do. I can't. It's because we're committed to that as identity. Now, I'm not critiquing that. I understand that. What I'm saying is I would like to be a reminder that there is this joy that we can access that doesn't really need a machine. There is a joy that we can have, a sense of vitality, which aligns with Aristotle's sense of purpose, which is not like purpose for the sake of, I want to serve humanity, or I want to deliver this, or I want people to feel happy or write a book. Purpose in Aristotle was about aligning with your true nature. But it's about actually like feeling that thing that makes you want to get to the goal. There are not many people who feel that thing. A lot of people, I just spoke the other day to a group of people who were coaching people who had lost their jobs. And I was like, I know this is like not the time to be like, let's look on the bright side. But seriously, let's look on the bright side. You actually have an opportunity to recreate your life. The opportunity you once decided you didn't care about. People in corporations are constantly talking about burnout and fatigue and overload. Well, then why are you working for a corporation? Oh, because I gave my life over to someone else telling me what to do.
Yeah.
I almost feel like wired into the intrinsic condition from maybe in part conditioned by parents, but then by teachers, and then just like by gods. Like we have this yearning to connect with something that will tell us what to do, or something that will do something for us. People feel like this is going to take away their fatigue. It may take away your fatigue from writing that letter. But the question is are you losing your vitality because you're giving up your agency? And so I think for most people in the world, it's a good question to ask. I never assume to know what's right. I'm not one of those people. I think my excitement about this exploration is that we have a chance to give up boring tasks to machines and and not to forget the second part of that, which is to reconnect with our vitality as individuals, as families, and as a species. And if we only delegate those tasks, but forget about the vitality, we're going to still be drones moving on in life. And so what I would say to anyone who feels like maybe they're already too far gone is it's never too late to reclaim your agency. It's never too late to say, wait a minute, like the reason my friends like me is because they like me, not ChatGPT's version of me.
Yeah. So I feel like you're making a number of distinctions there. I mean, I think we're getting a clearer picture of the differences between humanity and AI and how they all relate to each other. I mean, you talked about the default mode network, talked about consciousness, and then also self-determination and agency and how all those things are like wrapped together. And I think it gives us a much clearer picture on where humans stand, where AI stands, and what is actually going to lead to a vital, purpose-filled life. And so I alluded to this earlier, but most people think that AI is similar. I mean, it seems like it could be similar to the way that like a human would think, but I think the big unlock is like the default mode network that you were talking about. And so I think it's important to get into that a little bit, because as of now, I mean, that is totally unique to human beings. Can you explain like what that is and how that's different from how AI thinks?
Yeah. So, I think as I said in the book, what I wanted to outline was that
guys, you can now generate videos directly from ChatGPT. So you might have seen that ChatGPT released GPTs.
That there is this network that that only comes on mostly when you unfocus or when you're mind wandering. And we can go through different things you can do to activate this, which is responsible for managing complex situations. Like for most people, logical things that are obviously logical are not that hard to figure out. Like, where do I buy milk? Go to the store. What time do I have to go to the meeting? It's in your timetable. But how do I manage a home where I have a kid and I have a demanding boss, and I also know that I need to take care of myself, but I don't have the time and I'm not really feeling well? It's like there's a lot of different variables for most people in their lives. Mm-hmm. The logical brain, most people turn to the logical brain, which is a large part of the brain, but the prefrontal cortex is an important piece of that. That's not equipped to give you those answers. The default mode network is a series of networks that are of regions that are connected, that is actually able to process complex information. It's able to also process abstract information. Mm-hmm. That's another story, but I feel like as a society, we are losing touch with the importance of abstraction, representation. People want everything that's concrete. Like, what movement should I make? What food should I eat? But the moment you start talking about mindset or thought, people are like, oh, that's not as obvious as, food or movement. But I think that complexity, abstraction, and also the default mode network is wired so that it can pick up memories that are metaphorically in nooks and crannies in your brain that the prefrontal cortex, your focus brain, cannot pick up. So in the book, I point out that I have nothing against focus. Right? Focus is great. You can finish a task. You can go from A to B. It's great. But there are some disadvantages of focus. One of them is that focus can drain the brain of energy. And so by the end of the day, studies have shown people tend to not care about other people because they don't have the energy to care. If you feed them, they start caring again. But by the end of the day, if you ask someone to save someone in a life-threatening situation, they're like, no thanks. It's compassion fatigue, we sometimes call that. The other thing is that if you are just focused all day, most people live their lives with focus, fatigue, and then they're out for the count. But if you focus all day, you are not paying attention to what's around you. New trends, like you were talking about earlier about people who are ignoring AI. Anne Wang was so interested in his word processor number 2, second version, that he didn't even realize the PC was about to hit the market and became bankrupt because he wasn't paying attention to what was around him. It's the same thing with if you focus with your nose to the grindstone, you're not going to pay attention to upcoming trends that might be relevant to who you are. Also, when you focus on one point, you're not connecting dots. And when you're not connecting dots, you are you're not able to be creative. And then, as I said, the self network in the brain is actually the default mode network. It writes your story. The focus network will give you a LinkedIn profile, which is not who you are. So the default mode network can reverse all of those disadvantages. The default mode network can give you back your energy. It can allow you to consider other stuff that might be relevant. It can allow you to think about upcoming trends. It can allow you to become creative and tap into your originality. And it can also allow you to feel more self-connected. And so if we ignore this network that is made for inquiry and wondering, we're just totally focused on ChatGPT doing all that work for us, then we're going to lose that capacity for solving complex problems. And I think a lot of organizations, for example, are not training people for this mindset. They're not training people to access this originality. Because think about it. If you no longer need your brain real estate to do mundane tasks, what a wonderful thing. But now you've got a whole lot of neurons that you can use for other things. And now is the time to start training and retraining for creativity, for agility, for managing change. Because if you're not training those things, we have a conscious brain, we have an unconscious brain. Even as I'm saying this, I can imagine some people's unconscious brain saying, no, I don't want to, I'm not a creative person. I don't want to do this. Well, it's not all innate. You can be trained to do those things. Yeah. And I think this originality circuit, creativity circuit, this is the circuit that was probably responsible for some of the most major discoveries of our time. Einstein said that his discovery was a musical perception. It wasn't a logical finding. He was able to express it logically. But when information arrives, you have to create space and time in your life for information to arrive. And
yeah, I think what's interesting is we talked offline a little bit about, the other thing you mentioned was consciousness and the default mode network. And then we were starting to get in the mind versus brain and all this sorts of conversation. And, all these different emerging fields that are raising this question about consciousness and the brain. And, there's near-death studies, there's quantum physics, there's neuroscience, there's even what you observe happens in hospice care and some kind of weird things that you see there. And what's interesting is as you think about the mind and the brain, if consciousness is not solely located in the brain, then that means that we are receiving consciousness and also the fact of like when it comes to your purpose or your calling or whatever, like some of these like greatest discoveries that you're saying, I think it's interesting. I think there's like there's an attuneness to maybe something transcendent or larger than ourselves that we then connect into maybe in some of these times of unfocus. And, I don't know how all those parts relate to each other, but default mode network and consciousness, especially if consciousness is not coming from the brain. But I just know that from an experiential standpoint, sometimes it feels like, oh, you're downloading something. So you're like AI can't create.
You can sell this $5 spatula on Amazon and compete with hundreds of other spatula sellers.
Create your calling for you. It could help you potentially come up with a good idea, but that good idea might not necessarily be right for you. So it's like you're dreaming, you are passionate about certain things. There are things that feel like they've been placed inside you. Even people that are more spiritual feel like they'll say something like a divine imperative or God's plan. But even someone who's not spiritual might say, I was put on this earth to do this thing, And I feel like a lot of those realizations don't necessarily come when we're just like staring at a computer all day long, like focus. It happens in those moments of wonder. You feel like you're downloading something. So I don't know if you have a take on that whole thing as it relates to consciousness and the brain.
Yeah, there are lots of debates and consciousness, right? There's the hard problem, which is like, how does the brain generate this experience state? And people are still arguing about that. Some people think of consciousness outside of the realm of mental processing. They think of it as like something that is connected to behaviors, like communications, tools, actions. The first thing I'd want to say, and for me, this is a fascinating thing. And it's probably one of the reasons that I decided to dive right into AI. It's one of the fascinating things for me. I just actually contributed to a paper on AI and neuroscience where I talked about the fact that, firstly, in humans, the same brain, different brain regions can be used to process the same emotion. There's a kind of efficiency, whereas it doesn't work exactly the same in computers. But what is fascinating to me about human thinking and intelligence is that it doesn't just come from the brain. There's now extensive research to show that the gut and the brain are influencing each other. Now, does ChatGPT have a gut? Not yet. We'd have to wait for robots.
Yeah.
And we also talk about the HPA axis, which is the stress axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The adrenals sit above the kidney. Does ChatGPT have a kidney? No. So wait a minute. You're telling me that my intelligence is connected to what's above my kidneys, and it's connected, also my heart. Yeah, apparently depression can lead to heart disease, and heart disease can cause depression. And there are neurons that are in the heart. So is my heart thinking? I think, what about embodiment? Embodiment is the feeling of, like, when you feel something in your bones. Does ChatGPT have a conviction that is not just in its head, but in its body? Well, until we have robots that replicate humans, we'll be talking about large language models. We're talking only about a head. Mm-hmm. There's no adrenal, there's no gut, there's no heart, there's no rest of the body. And so the human intelligence to me is vastly different. I find it very naive when people talk about human intelligence as if they're training computers to be like the human brain. Well, they must not recognize that intelligence lives outside of the brain and other parts of the body. And there are many people who believe that consciousness could actually exist in systems outside the body.
Yeah.
So I don't feel that my overall comment would be that I think human consciousness, I do relate to it as if it is divine. Meaning I feel it's amazing that we're creating these machines. Like, this is human created, right? The humans created a machine that can help them do stuff faster. That's kind of smart. It's kind of cool. But it's also cool that we're creating things that can help us connect, like these glasses that can allow you to talk to someone who doesn't speak your language. It's as if there is a drive in humans to make space for being human, to make space to allow this consciousness to manifest in the world. But I think it's easy to get taken in by ChatGPT and forget that there are other agendas that we can engage in.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good framing of it, because at the end of the day, there will be advancements in technology, and what this looks like in 10 years from now won't look like what it does today. But really, I mean, the whole consciousness that you're conversation that you're talking about, if consciousness does not originate from the brain, then that will be the forever game changer. Essentially, I mean, ChatGPT will and AI will always be under the domain of humans. And even if it progresses to such a level where they're talking about like artificial general intelligence, which now it like literally has the cognitive capabilities of humans. And I mean, we could talk about that if that's like actually possible or not. But I think that at the end of the day, it still won't have that factor. Like there's still things about humanity that we need to hold into play. And as we think about our creativity and our purpose and our calling on earth, I feel like understanding that and then approaching this tool in such a way where it could help us live that out, rather than what you're saying, you're looking to the tool to do everything for you. And then it just like erases everything that is original and creative. And yeah, I don't know. So in your own usage, do you have like practical examples of of that kind.
Est-ce que tu te sens perdu dans ta vie? Est-ce que tu te sens démoralisé? Tu sais
Of that kind of creative co-partnership that you have going on, where you're leveraging the best parts of your brain and your humanity with the best parts of what this thing is.
Yeah. So I use I use ChatGPT in a lot of different ways. I am one of those people who will sometimes use it to quickly frame an email. If I don't feel like writing out the whole sentence, I'll just put in a few words and then we'll use that for that reason. I do use ChatGPT. So in my business life, I sometimes will try to think about email copy and try to think about subject lines to improve open rates. And I've put myself in competition against ChatGPT. And ChatGPT's rates are always higher than the average, but consistently over the last few months, my rates have been higher. And what I've been thinking is there is something like ChatGPT's beautifully framed subject line is captivating beyond the average. But I think what I think about is, well, why do I want people to open this email? I want them to open it because I care about something. So there's something that is emotional, that is my sentience, that probably feeds into that line that captures the attention of other people. And I think that using ChatGPT in that way, where you're comparing yourself against that, is awesome. I also think on many occasions, I will say to people, here's a quick summary from ChatGPT, and in addition to that, here are my thoughts. And so the part that's mundane, I don't need to organize that, but I also want to say what I'm thinking. I have decided to not fully so I spoke to a journalist, someone who teaches journalism at Yale, and I asked her, so how do you teach journalism these days? Like she said, I openly use ChatGPT. I will tell my students, have ChatGPT write this essay, and then I want you to write the essay originally. And she said, almost all the time, their own essays are better. It loses that generic flavor. And so I think as long as we think experimentally, as long as we're constantly challenging ourselves to be and feel the smart people we could be, everyone has an intelligence that they can access. Everyone on earth has something that is their best self. Why wouldn't you let that be your ideal self? And then everything else is serving with that.
Yeah, I mean, that example is so powerful because if you think about it, it wrote an essay, you wrote an essay, but like, what if you took your essay and then put it in there, and then it basically like supercharges it to another level? And that's you. That's like your original ideas. And I think that's that like middle ground of people who don't want to use AI or criticize AI will be like, oh, well, there's a lack of originality. And we already covered that is true. But if you take your own ideas and then it refines them for you, it helps that you say it clearer. It helps you write a better title of an email, and then it helps the copy hit harder because maybe you've trained it on the rules of science or attention or something else. I think that is like a beautiful case of we're in a world where you have to come up with your own original ideas, but there's such an inundation of information. There's such an inundation of confusion around topics. And so if it could help you say something better and clearer, that was your own idea, like I find that to be like invaluable. Like you'll be able to get a message across to people, but it has to start with your idea. It has to start with your own idea first, and then you move into it, because your idea will come with soul. Like it looks like it's coming from a soulful human being, versus I guarantee you in that experiment that you were talking about with Yale, that original thing probably had no soul. It's just like it was a generic thing, so.
It troubles me when I look at writing styles, and because I've written a few books myself, I often found that the editing recommendations were a little bit more ChatGPT-like than I wanted them to be. I think that there's a complexity to writing and expression that is sometimes confused for being just hyper-intellectual when it's not. Like someone sort of said to me recently that his daughter's son asked, why does Shakespeare have to be so obtuse? Like, you know, does he really have to say, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, as opposed to like, you rock?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, shall I compare thee to a summer's day is one thing. You rock is another thing. They're both amazing. You know, I don't think we need to, I am personally a romantic.
Imagine being able to build anything, for any reason, in any style, at any.
I like hyperbole in context. I like poetry. I think the whole condition, the state of being human is poetic. I see that and I don't just mean like you have to be a poet or philosopher to be poetic. Watch people on a boardwalk. It's amazing. Like, who doesn't like people watching? Because people are amazing to watch and beautiful to watch. So I think that if we can remember that machines are here to really help us, they're here to help us become better versions of ourselves, and they're here to help us free up time so we can engage with consciousness in different ways. I mean, you speak to any meditator and they will tell you there is a world outside of perception that is intriguing. You know, anyone who's done transcendental meditation, for example, and I've done that for years, and it's a whole other world. It's not the world of perception. It's not what I'm looking at. I like the world of perception, but it's one kind of world. The world of meditation takes you into states of consciousness that make you understand the other place. You know, I'm always sort of laughing to myself that there's so much attention and budget being given to outer space and not a lot to inner space. I think inner space has gotten the short shrift. And what I would say is that it's time to give credence to inner space and inner space exploration. Because if you think Moon and Mars are cool, states of consciousness are way cooler.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I feel like those are the unique spaces that we can operate in as human beings. And I think there's a cool thing that, I mean, the theme throughout the entire conversation is potentially offloading certain things and knowing what to offload to then get into these other headspaces that will then maximize what you're doing. And I think that's actually the exciting part of, I think with this era that we're about to embark in, entrepreneurs, like, it's probably the greatest era that they're ever going to be walking into. Yes. I mean, when it comes to, think about Mark Zuckerberg, like of Facebook 20 years ago. I feel like those types of stories will become so much more commonplace, because if you're the visionary stepping in, you're operating in these zones, and then you get to bring that vision back to artificial intelligence. And then it helps you create things that would have taken you millions of dollars and like 10, 20 people to do. I mean, that's a pretty incredible thing. But again, it depends on the spaces that you're like connecting into and the headspaces that you're connecting into. And I think that's like such an important distinction as it comes to what we create, like moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very optimistic about the fact that AI is going to save us a lot of time in businesses, and it's going to save us a lot of time in sort of being efficient and not needing 700,000 people. If you look at the direction of computer programming right now, you know, I don't think it's going to be too long before we're able to do what we need to do without knowing any programming. I think it'll still help companies to have someone overseeing that. But I don't think computer programming in of itself I think it's going to become much more accessible to all of us. And for that to become accessible, it means we now have another language and another mechanism by which we can create. And so the future of business to me is pretty exciting if we can walk into this unknown space. So many people are staying away from this because they're uncertain. You know, when you're uncertain, it turns on parts of your brain that 75% of the time are wrong about the fact that something bad's going to happen. So anyone who's uncertain thinks, oh my God, like it's uncertain. And immediately the brain is a sort of disaster predicting machine. You know, it starts saying, oh, something bad's going to happen. But studies have shown that 75% of the time it's wrong. I would encourage anyone who's feeling like there's this, like, I don't know the future. There's this dark space. How do I walk into it? You can walk into it because the only light you need is the light within yourself. And the light within yourself is the light of curiosity. It's the light of creativity. It's the light of ingenuity.
Yeah, I mean, that really opens up a whole nother thing for me, because I'm curious what you think about about learning itself and learning in the brain, right? Because I feel like we might, again, going back to the idea of not using it all or using it in an incorrect way, I think we might embark on an entire era of where people's online brands and their businesses, whatever, there's going to be a huge disconnect into if you interact with that person in real life and like who they actually are and what they've learned in their own journey. Because it's not just tied to your own vision, but the pace at which your own vision like scales, because you have to actually learn about whatever message or thing that you're putting out into the world. And so there could be this box thing that is presenting to the world like you know everything about this certain topic or this domain or whatever your field that you're in. But really it's because AI was doing all the work and then you didn't actually do it. And so do you think that there's like an unlock in terms of whatever we're building that we're actually learning through that process and getting better through it versus we're not learning at all and then we're just copying and pasting?
Yes.
CarPlay sans fil en 5 minutes, même dans une vieille voiture. Avec ce petit écran pratique, vous transformez n'importe quel...
Yes, I think we live in an age where experimentation, tinkering, is the way to go.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of tinker, dabble, doodle, try was to tinker, dabble, think about it, try, because out of that will come learning.
Yeah.
You know, there's a quote that I don't remember the exact quote of it by Rumi that basically says that the path will reveal itself once you walk on it. So you don't wait to see the path. The path will reveal itself as you walk through it. You know, when you're walking through a forest, you may feel lost, but and this is a thought of someone else. I also can't remember this, but you can feel lost, but the trees are not lost. The trees are there. So there's a whole world waiting for you to discover it. And discover, if we thought we knew everything, there's nothing to discover. So then you might as well just go to sleep and say, I got it. Like, I know my little life and my little world, and that's enough. And for some people, it is enough. But I think that what is enlivening about being human is the ability to explore. And whether it means exploring AI by choosing a program that pertains to your line of work or your way of being, or whether it means just getting involved more about the thinking in the space so you can figure out whether you truly don't want to get involved or whether maybe you want to get involved. I think exploration is, and human ingenuity is something that is an elevating experience that I wish everyone could have.
Yeah. I mean, I gave you an example. I mean, offline, we were talking about this example of this clip that was online of, you know, you get an argument with your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, and then you go to ChatGPT, figure out how to resolve the argument, then bring that response back to your boyfriend or girlfriend. And I feel like there's so much nuance here because there's multiple different examples of exploration, right? So if you turn your brain off and you go to ChatGPT and you say, okay, tell me what to say. Tell me what the perfect response would be to this. This is what you said. Okay. Copy and paste and go, and it'd be like, you text it back to them or whatever, you're in a conflict. Sounds great. You didn't actually understand why you were wrong, or you didn't understand the practical application of why that was a good response to the person. And so obviously that would be a negative because there's no internal exploration or change that is happening within you. But, you know, I think there is an example of maybe you do get in a conflict in ChatGPT in some ways. It's like reading in a textbook. It's like you're in front of maybe a therapist or something else, and it's teaching you about, okay, here's how you went wrong in your interaction, and here's the proper application of that. Even the best ideas that ChatGPT comes up with, I think for your career or your work, it is about, oh wow, that was a great idea, but it's also about you understanding why that was a great idea. And so if you don't understand why that's a great idea, then again, I think you're just losing the plot everything that we've been talking about right now. So
yeah, I think maybe you're unwittingly creating a new form of therapy, which is ChatGPT based couples therapy.
Yeah.
Where I can see that in the future, you could actually structure like a 8-module series on ask ChatGPT these questions about you, about the person who's the other person in the couple over 8 modules, and you'll learn from ChatGPT. Like, it's not that far out an idea. You might want to,
not at all.
You might want to consider that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, and those come back to the ideas of what we talked about up front is there are so many ways that we don't even recognize that this is going to impact the world. And so many different practical applications. I mean, if you think back to, I don't know, when Steve Jobs, like, you know, they were inventing the iPhone and stuff like that. I mean, in 2006, did you have any concept for an app store? And that was like 19 years ago. It's not even that long time. There was no app store. And now even you making that suggestion, you know, it's like that actually might be a useful product, but that doesn't mean that we should automatically just erase any sort of human component to it. But I do think that if ChatGPT can be that helpful from a therapeutic standpoint, it will encourage actual therapists and psychologists and stuff like that to level up their craft and also think about how can I co-partner in a very healthy way to give my patient the best treatment. It's kind of funny because I told my own therapist, I'm like, you know what you should do? You should create a number of threads in ChatGPT, one for each patient, and start uploading all your file history into those things. And each thing becomes an evolving conversation of, this is where I'm getting stuck. This is what they've been diagnosed with. This is what our conversations look like. And then it could kind of help you work through how to best treat that patient. Now you have the final say. You're the human in the situation, but it might show you things that like you would have never thought of otherwise. And I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's so many possibilities of how to take the best parts of what you're saying and the best parts of what it can do and create something beautiful. So
yeah, I think we're on the same page about the fact that if we can coexist with AI and recognize that we prioritize our humanity over and above just giving away our ingenuity, we'll probably be in a good place. I think people who are involved in the space are worried that
the first time I tried Remarkable, I thought, wow, imagine if I had this.
That we are imbuing AI with so much power that it may start to autonomously decide that actually you don't really matter. And actually, I have a mind of my own. And I think people who are intimately involved with AI are afraid of that outcome. The question is, who is overseeing that? And how can we make intelligent decisions? Because I think, you know, if you're not involved in the creation of AI or in one of these large companies, you're not going to know what's coming down the line. When I hear about robots, for example, walking the streets of certain countries, it sounds cool, but it's also like not that cool. I'm like, well, it'll be cool if I know that the AI is always in control. If the AI suddenly loses its temper or blows its fuse, literally, then what do we do with this? And if there are like 100,000 of them running around?
Well, I mean, but obviously you're not like creating the technology, but with what you know about the brain, I mean, do you think those sorts of things are actually possible?
Yes.
Why?
I do. Because the people who've been involved with it, people like Elon Musk, for example, have issued very serious warnings in their intimacy with the AI that there is a way in which there's a certain kind of autonomy that the machine can have that will allow it to take over, and that we must watch that. So that's one reason. The other is I'd been tracking an invention by Martine Rothblatt, who is married to a woman named Bina, and she joked that she wanted to create a robot bust version of Bina. And if you if you Google this and watch the interview of Bina talking to Bina 48, which is this version of herself, at some point, Bina says, you know, I would love it if one day you, robot that looks like me, could go gardening with me. And Bina 48 says, yeah, that would be lovely, but because of my physical limitations, I can't really do that. It says, and actually humans confuse me because, and it says, wait a minute, I am the real Bina. And that's sort of like that. It's a mic drop moment where you're like, what just happened? Like, and if you amplify that, how would we take care of that in a world? Like, let's say we were here, the irrational fear is that the microphone will decide that it doesn't want to be here anymore and it's going to go somewhere else. So the light will be like, time to go to sleep. The light will go off. That the cameras will start walking around the room.
It's like it takes on a mind of its own.
Right. And I think that's what people are afraid of.
And that's a legitimate fear.
Well, I think it's a legitimate concern to oversee that so that it doesn't happen. You know, I don't think I would catastrophize it in just saying this is the reason we should eliminate all AI, because I think AI has done there's an amazing transformation of society. But I do think that ethical oversight is important to make sure that what we are making is not our own destruction.
Well, what we were talking about with the default mode network, do you feel like that is a thing that could actually be replicated in the future where it's like imagining?
Well, I'm working on that right now.
What do you mean?
I'm working on creating a different model of computational processing that's not just node to node logic or sequencing. I'm trying to understand, what will it take for a machine to be intuitive? And there have been people who've, fuzzy logic, for example, it's a form of logic that taps into some of that. But if we look analytically at whether this is possible, do I think it's possible? I think it's possible to a very high degree of sophistication. And I don't think, because until the adrenal and the gut and all of that is created, I don't think the intelligence is going to be identical. But I think there is something about the processing of, because I also do psychotherapy and I sort of have, I'm in a room with extremely complex humans who, and the conclusions we reach and the breakthroughs they have are almost never logical. Even though I teach brain-based techniques, these techniques are just for them to use and then go through a non-logical pathway to come to the answers for themselves. I feel like what is human is different from what we see in computational output right now. And so just for myself, I'm just sort of creating a model just to test it against current computational logic to see if one can create a different way of representing the brain. But what I've seen so far in how the brain is represented is admirable for the complexity and the number of inputs and outputs. But I don't see a lot of psychoanalytical constructs coded into how the machine is working. I don't see a lot of philosophical constructs coded into how the machine is working. And because I've started to work on this for myself, just as an experiment, I've gone far enough in that process where I think there is computational logic that needs to be applied differently to represent this more complex state of humanity.
Did you know that there is one specific factor in all of our relationships that affects the health, the longevity?
Do you think it could get to a state of actually understanding a room? I mean, that was your original example, right? Yeah. Getting back to the idea of like, can it get to the point where it would simulate what other human being? Because I mean, there's so many things when, one of the things I learned about the default mode network a long time ago, and we actually had him on our podcast, was Matthew Lieberman. He's a neuroscientist out in UCLA. He wrote the book called Social, and he was talking about how with the default mode network, when we're in a state of unfocus, a lot of times we start thinking about other people, and so we can make these predictive models in our mind of what, like I could be making a predictive model right now about what you're thinking and you're looking at me. I'm like, okay, he's looking at me with a certain look or something. And that might mean this, and that might mean this, and then that will happen to this and this and this. And so there's so much processing that happens in a split second of when you're looking at someone's face. And then you could imagine like 10,000 outcomes of like, wait a second, he might stab me right now and I'm in danger or something like that. So do you feel like that sort of sophistication would actually be possible in a machine?
So I do anticipate that the level of sophistication is going to be very high. But metaphorically speaking, I think machines are going to be a new species. I think if we scale the number of machines and robots, we will have a different species to interact with. As you mentioned, like you interact with dogs, you interact
like a monkey. It's like a new,
right.
Yes.
It's a new species. So the idea of figuring out how this new complex species, quantum computing is pretty impressive for how quickly it can come to answers. And even our current AI is pretty impressive. So to have these machines that are processing information at such a phenomenal rate is a kind of amazing addition to our society. I think we as humans have to try to figure out how do we want to really spend our time warring against other humans, or do we want to spend our time thinking about how to live alongside the machines we're creating? That's one paradigm. And partly because of my own personal inclinations and interests, I think learning how to live alongside machines is important. I have tremendous respect for the intellectual power in quantum computing and the intellectual power in AI right now. There's nothing to disrespect about it. But as I said earlier, I do enjoy the experience of being human. And in my psychotherapy office, that is what people are striving to master, is reaching the highest levels of their own lives in being human.
Yeah. You've mentioned the ethical thing like multiple times. And I think that is an appropriate word because it's happening so fast, and the possibilities of what you're discussing. It's like, I can't imagine there's that many conversations that are just like, hey, wait a minute, let's just take a pause on this. And I was watching like a TED Talk about this, and they were talking about part of it's like an arms race between the United States and China and other countries. And it's very hard to understand for the average person. But the idea of what I was talking about with the curve happening is like, for every day that goes by, if China's also working on AI and, other countries are working on AI, they might be able to get to a place with this where they created something that is forever going to give them an advantage because they had a 6-month runway, a 10-month runway. And I think if you zoom out as a world, like, and sit back, you need people who are sitting in high positions thinking about what are like the most ethical outcomes for this. Because when I say social media is like small, it's so small as an invention compared to all the stuff and the possibilities. And then, you're talking about a reality that I don't know if you can undo that in the future. And so I think it's important that people consider the ethical considerations of all this stuff.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a case to be made for America remaining competitive in the AI space, from an economic position. Mm-hmm. I also think there's a case to be made for figuring out how we want to interact globally. Mm-hmm. I read an article recently, that was about, that basically the person who runs McKinsey was saying that it's not just the next decade, but the next century is the century for India. And I was sort of wondering what this thought process was. And he pointed out that by 2034 or something, India is going to have 20% of the world's talent. That's a lot of talent to have to be able to deploy
Oh, salut. Viens ici, viens ici. Je suis Eric Boisjoli, puis j'ai une proposition à te
to be able to deploy, and that the power of India was not just in the growth of Indian businesses, but in the growth of multinational businesses. So if as a nation, I think we need to figure out and again, this is an opinion, I'm no expert at this, but my personal feel is that we need to figure out how to protect interests the way that every country needs to, but also how to interact across boundaries to create these multinational businesses that can all have oversight. Because you don't want, one country having oversight and another country not having oversight.
Yeah.
You want to be able to have some kind of international agreement around what can be allowed to grow in the AI space and what isn't.
When it comes to the ethical stuff, I mean, if someone comes to you and, I mean, you earlier in the conversation, you alluded to a joke about someone, who's scared of losing their job or is losing their job. And I think that we've come from an era in which people associated their career with their identity, their output, to be more specific, like their output at their job was the means of their self-worth, which, or was their identity, which is obviously problematic. And B, we've just coming from an era of monotony, which is like a lot of the people you were talking about interacting with the neuro business group, stuff like that, of people who just have no vision or no passion. Now it's interesting because knowledge work is only 80 years old, really. So it's like there was a pre-state before like 1940 of the way that the world worked and the way that people related to their own purpose and their own creativity and all this stuff. And then we had knowledge work that rose. And so then people were in these 9-to-5 jobs where they were doing these specific tasks, but it wasn't necessarily the most creative thing. And now there is the very real possibility that people are going to lose their jobs and they're not going to be replaced. And so with everything with all of your work and everything that you know about neuroscience, and I was just curious, what is the path for that person? What do you believe is the path for that person on like what the future looks like?
I think continuous reinvention and what the psychologist and psychiatrist I mentioned earlier, Dabrowski, recommended, which is positive disintegration. So Dabrowski studied gifted students, and what he noticed was that they were always falling apart to put themselves together at a higher level. And rather than calling this mental illness by falling apart, he said what gifted students do is they see this as an opportunity to put themselves together again. So I don't think we should be as afraid as we are of reinvention. It is naturally scary to have like one career path and suddenly to realize that it doesn't exist anymore. But if you see yourself as someone who is in charge of your own reinvention, I think every person, the coaching literature states that Richard Boyatzis has done this work, that you're more likely to be successful at reaching your end goal. Like, let's say you're someone who's just lost your job and you don't know what to do. If you start not by putting out fires, by saying, okay, where's the next job like this? Or how do I solve this problem? Before you try to put out fires, you start with an ideal self. And when I work with corporations, I give them an ideal self guide where they do a deep dive into their values. They do a deep dive into, well, what do I envision for myself? What do I hope? How do I see the future? And once you have this compass, you have the basis for direction, your brain can help you navigate toward that. Even if you don't know where you're going right now, your brain at least knows where it's going. But most people go through life without having this ideal self. And in the brain, the ideal self is always in conflict with the real self. Mm-hmm. And so most people are like, my real self is like, I'm uncertain and I don't know what to do and I have no choice but to find another job like this. And so they forget about the ideal self. But if you empower the vision of the ideal self, you are creating a way for your brain to navigate into the future. And so my primary recommendation would be ask yourself, what is this ideal self? And Dabrowski, it's a complex model to go into, but one key part of that model is ask yourself, am I living my life according to my own values?
Yeah.
If I value my family, am I spending enough time with them? If I value making money, am I spending enough time actually making money? If I value freedom, do I have enough autonomy in my life? And if I don't, then how do I create a life that honors the value that I have for my life?
Yeah. I mean,
You want to change your life today? Make a decision. Focus on where you want to go instead of what you're afraid of. Really create your life.
I mean, when I think about the ideal self, it really makes me think like, I mean, there's these two words like purpose and calling. And I think in one sense, our mission on earth is fixed in the sense that the work that we're doing, if it isn't others centered, it usually ends up like with an empty result. And so someone builds a big tech company, they get rich, they get successful, they're on magazines, but yet that they don't feel like they made any positive impact on the world. And then they're not even interacting with anybody that they feel like they positive, or on the flip side might be a negative thing. There might be a sense of emptiness in that and someone's purpose. And then you hear people in the knowledge work field, you interact with them all the time. And there's, and I'm sure you've come across this, there's this aimlessness, right? There's this aimlessness of like, I just feel like I'm pushing buttons all day long. So in one sense, I guess this age of AI will break that pattern because like there's no, but again, you still need to make money. So there's that whole equation that's opened up. And so if you think about your purpose in terms of service of another person, a love of another person, a connection with another person, connection with the divine, we're talking about the whole consciousness thing, and the default word network, all of that stuff is a purpose. But then the leeway in terms of your calling is not necessarily fixed throughout your life. That's that's a variable that changes, right? So, I mean, what you're doing is different than what I'm doing, but it might have the same core purpose of like, you want to help people with their health. You want to help people with their minds. You want to help people with their business. I mean, the end goal is to help people. The end goal isn't necessarily like, hey, I want to get rich and make a ton of money, type of thing. And so I think that if people could understand the differences between those two and the fact that it's almost like the knowledge work field we're going back to 100 years ago, which is the person, your friend who owns a restaurant, it's a beautiful thing. He's serving meals to an audience of people and gets to experience that level of connection with those people through sitting around a table. And I think that there's going to be a lot of reimagining or rethinking of human-centered roles, human-centered things that we can do, and a lot of creative ways to get back to that. And I ultimately think that in knowledge work, the most fulfilling times, if you were to think back into your career, probably were times when you felt like you were impacting somebody tangibly. Like if you impacted your coworker in some sort of way and helped them with their work and that made them really happy, that probably gave you a sense of fulfillment, And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. I think the thing that's complicated is how are we going to fill the money gap, And so I don't know.
Well, the way the world makes money is changing significantly, right? If you look at like top influencer salaries, are pretty high. Mm-hmm. Some professions, they're stable, but as inflation increases, it changes the value of what you're making. So I think we're always going to have to crack the code on that, like how to make money. I think the idea of reinvention and the idea of opening yourself to your calling, which is, I think, one of the things that you started about, I think is such an important thing, because I'm not sure whether my serving other people makes me happy, or whether because I am happy when I'm serving them, I serve them. Like if I was miserable serving people, I would not want to do that. So I'm not sure if the end result is serving people, or the end result is connecting with, Aristotle said, your greatest virtues, which make you happy. When you are aligned with something, you're like, yeah.
It becomes like a feedback loop. Yeah.
Right. And so I think I think the calling is a great vision to have for every human being. To say, I will not give up on my calling. And the last thing we can do about the calling, this is a paradox, is desire separates us from the thing we want, right? Because if you want something, then desire assumes that it is separate from you. Always.
Mm-hmm.
And so if something is separate from you, how are you going to get it? If you're always desiring it, it's going to always be separate from you. So you have to move out of a state of desire to a state of realization where you are one with everything. You know, in Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, I refer to the brain, to all our brains, as not being buoys out at sea, but as being beads on a chain of common consciousness. You know, there's a lot of science to show that brains as far away as, India and France, even if people can't see each other, there's a way in which they can know what the other person is thinking if they're dialed into their internet, if they can't see or hear them.
That's crazy, yeah.
Which means brain waves have the power to be transmitted across continents. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to know. Does FaceTime connect you with someone, or is it enabling a connection? Because if you were not connected to someone in Australia, but you were speaking to them, FaceTime could never connect you to them. But if you are connected to them already, the technology is enabling that connection. It is exposing the fact that you were always connected.
Mm.
And so to me, technology is the assistant to spirituality.
Mm.
It is basically in the Internet of Things, with us being connected to each other, to AI, this is all revealing that perception has us think. What perception does is it's like a kaleidoscope. It makes everything seem separate. But when we go beyond perception, we begin to experience the world in the state of oneness. And I don't mean that in a kind of namby-pamby, we're all one kind of thing, but just as an experience. It's what you will hear people on psychedelics tell you, right? When they report the experiences of the world, there's entropy in the self circuit. The ego is diminished. And when the ego is diminished, because perception is no longer your master, you begin to understand that you are part of the greater whole. That is a glimpse for a second into the possibility of unity. And again, to me, this is not in my mind, this is not a religion or something for someone else to believe because of me. It's an invitation to consider that if that were a possibility, would you want to pursue that?
Mm. Yeah, I think
Pillai, du mouvement vient l'inspiration.
Le nouveau mozza gourmand de Petit Québec, du fromage fondant comme au resto, à la maison, fondant à fond.
I think as we close, I think if we get what you're saying right, you know, I think you're talking about this idea of technology being a partner of spirituality, but also science and people being able to connect to this larger whole. What's the picture that you see like 5 years from now? Like the next generation of thinkers, leaders, artists, what kind of world do you see if we get this right?
I think we'll continue to have a certain kind of polarization. So I think that people who are truly serious about advancing in art will advance. People who are serious about advancing in science will advance. People who are interested in complaining will be complaining. And I think that that's how the world will operate. But what I hope we will do is learn to communicate openly about what works and what doesn't work, and always remember that we are creators first and foremost. That somebody may be able to take away your job, but they can't really take away yourself unless you give yourself over to them.
And what's like one parting word you would have to say with someone who's anxious about this whole conversation, who doesn't know where they fit in and is afraid it's moving too fast?
I would say that one of the greatest powers any human being can have is what I call existential confidence. And it's a concept I worked on with Jim Selman, who's passed recently, but who's often known as the father of modern coaching. And what Jim and I firmly believed was that human beings who are afraid will become less afraid if they recognize that they can be committed to a possibility that is not yet reality, and recognize that they can create the reality that they want to create. That reality does not determine their commitments. Their commitments can shape a reality. And I think once you realize that you don't have to be rich, educated, good looking, whatever the thing is you think you have to be, you don't have to be. What you have to be is committed to the possibility of a life that you want to create. And once you're committed to that possibility, not just wishing it, but committed to that possibility, you will realize that your commitments can determine your reality.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like this is such a enriching conversation, and I can't think of one that's more relevant right now. And I think people hearing from you in your domain of life, I think is just such a unique perspective. And I think it could help people navigate what feels like a very complicated time. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for really having this conversation and inviting people into it in the way that you do. I appreciate you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.